What is the scariest thing you have seen? Was a dog walker. Opened the door to my most frequent client hanging by a slip lead she had gotten from me. She had been dead for 2 days. That me up for a long time. I was 14 years old and getting ready for school one morning. Nothing out of the usual. Whenever I went downstairs to my kitchen, I found my dad slumped on the kitchen floor. I yell. He doesn't respond. I start shaking him for a minute and still nothing. I go to get my mom. She comes out and also yells. As she was preparing to call 911, he finally gets up. Luckily for us, he had recently started a new medication that made him extremely tired. Apparently he fell asleep while making coffee. He is still with us to this day. But that memory always scares me. The inside of a green sedan car when a guy tried to kidnap me when I was 18. He had the door opened and tried to push me inside several times. I remember thinking, if he gets me inside I'm dead, so I put the heel of my shoe at the bottom of the door. One hand on TGE roof and pushed against the car with all my strength while crying. I bit, scratch and hit, but I'm thin and he was a muscular young guy. So the inside of that car is the scariest thing ever. I saw a young teenage girl sit on the edge of a 9-story building's roof contemplating suicide. Me and my work partner were on the ground watching a negotiator working with her to talk her down. I'm getting anxious just remembering it. She was talked off the ledge and brought to the hospital. Didn't jump. This winter I was driving a trailer with 2 horses from NY to FL. The day before it had just snowed about 8 inches or so. On the highway there was a massive big rig in front of me and I see this huge slab of ice fly off the top of the trailer. It was this enormous piece. Looked at least 5 feet by 5 feet and a few inches thick of just solid ice. The way it flew off the top of the trailer. It caught some wind underneath and went up even higher. I immediately knew that this piece was going to come down directly onto my windshield. The highway was full of cars, so swerving to avoid the ice wasn't an option, and being that I was carrying horses and pulling a trailer, a sudden movement would risk me losing control. I sat there staring at this huge piece of ice, knowing in a few seconds it would come crashing down onto my windshield. I just hoped for the best and hoped it wouldn't smash through it. My brother was sleeping in the back, and when it hit, it made one of the loudest noises I've ever heard, immediately waking him up. Luckily it didn't shatter the windshield. It did however rip off the side mirror on the left side of the car. It was very scary and I consider myself very lucky that it didn't end up way worse. Maybe 8 or 9 years ago I went on a late-night bike ride to Niagara Falls from my house in the neighboring town. It was kind of spooky fun going there at 1 a.m. with no one around. But that's not the scary part. Heading home around 2 a.m. I had to pass underneath the bridge leading back to Grand Island, where I lived at the time. Just on the other side of the dark underpass were 3 naked dudes throwing a rope up in a tree. One had a torch. Like an honest-to-goodness Indiana Jones torch. They all just kind of looked at me as I rolled past. I noped out pretty fast. To get home, I had to sort of loop around from the bike path and double back to get onto the bridge. As I was climbing up the bridge, I chanced to look down on the scene I'd just passed. All 3 guys were just staring silently up at me. It was another big nope. I got mugged once, so I'd say my mugger. I remember his face very clearly. He stabbed me once on the side of my torso and I had to go to therapy for it. It's 3 a.m. My bedroom door is half open and my fiancé is asleep next to me. I see a shadow of someone walking in the hallway. Then I see the person walking through the door. I am literally about to my pants. Then the person walks into my bedroom. It was an old birthday balloon that had floated to the ceiling a few weeks ago. The helium had leaked just enough to cause it to float 6 feet above the ground and hover silently into our room. My heart is racing just telling this story. Driving down the street approaching a freeway overpass and see a tanker crashing into the bridge and exploding on the overpass. I stop about 5 feet from the flames and can't back up because the traffic behind me. I jumped out and ran. Was backpacking in Sydney. Got a job helping renovate a guy's house. Walking out of the garage one day and something like dust or plaster falls on the back of my neck. I swipe it off. It hits the floor and starts moving. First instinct is to crush it. Which I'm glad I did. Was a redback spider that had been on my neck. My brother coming home almost naked and beaten up. Some Albanians had jumped him, stripped him and ganged up on him over some girl. Apparently. The fact that he was beaten up wasn't so scary. But he was naked. My mind immediately jumped to worse stuff. My mom being choked with a knife to her throat by my dad. It didn't help that I was 7 and I had to make the call for help. Warning. This is disturbing. This still haunts me to this day. Me and a buddy of mine went down this trail on our dirt bikes. We just got off the trail and headed back down the twisty road. We were having fun around the corners until we saw a cyclist walking down the road. At least that's what we assumed that he is, judging from his gear. Me and my buddy both felt bad for the poor sap since we thought some punk stole his bicycle from him or something. So we pulled off to the side of the road. I noticed that his left thigh is bleeding profusely, as we could see a big gash and could almost see the bone. We told him to sit down. And I took out my extra shirt from my backpack and wrapped it around his thigh while my buddy called for an ambulance. I kept asking the dude's name, but he wasn't talking properly. So I just assumed that he is in a lot of pain and is going through shock. I had first aid training, so I keep asking him what was his name. He never answered. Since the whole time I was talking to him he was looking straight along the road. 5 minutes later he told me to go check on his brother. I was wondering who he was referring to since he was the only cyclist we found, so I told him. "What's his number? Let me call him for you." He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "He went down the ravine." Out of panic I stood up and looked around. Sure enough, about 10 feet away I saw 2 broken bicycles that crashed on the metal barrier. I rushed to the scene and looked below the ravine, and there I saw a man. Mangled beyond recognition. His spine was twisted to the left. And his head twisted to the right. His eyes fixed on mine as I hear him whisper, "Help," and his eyes rolled onto the top of his eyelids. An ambulance arrived. The guy on the ravine died. While the brother who had a broken leg survived. I never forgot their faces. To this day on, I always tell myself that all of that was just a dream. My buddy still has those pictures taken from his GoPro camera. This happened just a year ago. I watched my father-in-law die 2 weeks ago. He was on hospice care due to dementia. So we knew at some point this would happen. What was unexpected was how quickly he went from just a little out of it to on his deathbed. Like 2 weeks. Just boom. My husband and I happened to be over there visiting when he suddenly went into respiratory distress. It was awful, like he was drowning and just couldn't get a breath. He looked terrified and in pain the whole time. The hospice nurse didn't make it there quickly enough. When he died, he gasped really loud and mucus foamed out of his mouth. It was one of the most grotesque and horrifying things I've ever witnessed. TLDR, dying of natural causes is way more violent and horrifying than you'd think. Had a schizophrenic meth head on a 3-day bender break into my house while my son was home and I was at work. My 12-year-old was on Christmas break from school. And decided to sleep in my bed with me the night before. To watch a movie. When I got up for work in the morning, I left him to sleep in my bed. It's a small safe town and he's responsible. So I didn't have any issue leaving him for the few days I still had to work before leaving for Christmas holidays. I had been at work for an hour when he texted me and told me someone was in the house. I immediately thought it was one of our friends dropping off Christmas baking or something. And texted back, "Who is it?" And he responded, "I don't know. They told the dogs not to bark and wake me up." I thought that was odd, so I drove home and checked around, not seeing anything. Went to my room and he was covered up in the blankets. I got him out of bed. He's telling me he saw someone. Didn't hear them leave. So I brought him upstairs to check the cameras. Once upstairs waiting for the camera recordings to load, he went to the washroom. I had a weird feeling. So I thought I'd better check the closet in my room, big walk-in closet. As soon as I walked in the closet and turned the light on, I saw him hiding in the corner. I was immediately furious. I yelled at him and called the police. I waited with him while he rocked back and forth sitting on the floor for the police to come. I wasn't sure what he was on, but he wasn't aggressive towards me. Police arrested him, and then once he was back at the detachment he attacked a female cop and tried to get her gun to shoot her. Once it was all over with, everything sunk in and it took a long time to get over that fear. I had to force myself to check the spot he was hiding at every time I went in my closet to tell my brain he wasn't there. A few years ago my family and I lived in a house with a rather large basement. Our basement had a door which led to a smaller room where my dad mainly kept his tools. When I was about 16, I went downstairs to get a textbook because I was working on a science project. This was about at 3 a.m. I went downstairs and turned the light on. While I was halfway down the stairs, the doorknob on the door which led to a smaller room started violently shaking. Whoever was trying to open the door couldn't because the door was locked. Then they banged on the door one time and stopped. I thought it could have my brother or dad who probably got stuck in there, so I wanted to go check. But just in case, I went back upstairs to pick up my dad's hunting rifle. With my heart beating out of my chest, I opened the door and no one was there. This is impossible because there is no other way out of the small door other than that door. And even if the person who was violently shaking the door opened the door and left, I would have seen him, her, while I was upstairs grabbing the rifle. My parents dismissed it as me hallucinating, but I know what I saw. Thankfully we moved out a while back. By far the scariest moment of my life.